The signal came from the darkness between stars. It was weak and desperate, repeating the same message over and over in 100 different languages. Lieutenant Baek Do-hyun sat up straight in his chair when his console began to flash. He was tired after a long shift, but the patterns on his screen made his heart beat faster. "Captain," he said, his voice careful but urgent. "I'm picking up a distress signal. It's coming from the Vesser system." Captain Park Ji-soo walked across the bridge of the TSS Indomitable. She was a tall woman with short black hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. Her uniform was clean but worn at the edges. She had been a soldier for 20 years, and every year had left its mark on her. "Put it through," she ordered. The speakers crackled, and then a voice filled the bridge. It was high and musical, like wind chimes in a storm. But there was terror in it. Pure, desperate terror. "This is High Speaker Revan of the Velreni people. Our world is dying. The Keth Swarm has come. Our fleet is destroyed. Our cities are burning. We beg any who hear this message, please help us. Please. We cannot survive alone." The message repeated. Do-hyun looked at his captain with wide eyes. "The Velreni," he said quietly. "I've read about them. They're peaceful. They don't even have weapons on their civilian ships." Ji-soo nodded slowly. She knew about the Velreni too. They were an amphibian species from a world of shallow oceans and gentle weather. Their planet had low gravity and thick atmosphere. They had never known war until the stars brought it to them. "And the Keth?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Insectoid swarm species," Do-hyun replied. "They consume everything. Worlds, resources, populations. The Galactic Concord has been trying to contain them for centuries. Nobody has ever stopped them completely." Ambassador Yu Mai-rei stepped forward. She was younger than the captain, with kind eyes and a diplomat's careful smile. But right now, she was not smiling. "Captain, we have no treaty with the Velreni. We have no obligation to respond. And the Keth." She paused. "The Keth have destroyed species much older and more powerful than us." Ji-soo looked at the star map on the main screen. The Vesser system was 3 days away at maximum speed. Her patrol fleet was small 5 ships, 2,000 soldiers. They were supposed to be mapping trade routes, not fighting wars. "How long until the Galactic Concord responds?" she asked. Do-hyun checked his data. "Their nearest response fleet is 2 weeks away. They're sending medical ships and evacuation transports." 2 weeks, Ji-soo repeated. "The Velreni will be dead in 2 weeks." Silence fell over the bridge. Everyone knew she was right. The Keth did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed. "Captain," Murray said softly, "if we go there, we might all die. Earth Command will not be happy." Ji-soo turned to look at her crew. They were young, most of them. They had families back on Earth, dreams, futures. She had no right to ask them to throw all of that away for strangers they had never met. But she also remembered why she had joined the fleet. It was not for glory or adventure. It was because she believed that humanity could be better, that they could be the kind of species that helped others, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous. "Open a channel to the fleet," she said. Do-hyun pressed a button, and suddenly Ji-soo's voice was going out to all 5 ships. "This is Captain Park Ji-soo. You've all heard the distress signal. You know what we're facing. The Keth Swarm is not something to take lightly. They've destroyed civilizations that have been sailing the stars since before humans learned to make fire." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We have no orders to help these people. We have no treaty, no alliance, no obligation. If we turn away right now, nobody would blame us. We could go home to our families and sleep well knowing we followed protocol." Another pause. Longer this time. But I didn't come to space to watch people die. I didn't put on this uniform to turn away when someone asks for help. Those people down there are terrified. They're dying. And they called out to the universe, hoping someone would answer. She took a deep breath. I'm going to answer. I'm taking the Indomitable to Desert Prime. Anyone who wants to come with me is welcome. Anyone who wants to stay behind and wait for orders, I understand. No judgment. No punishment. This is voluntary. She ended the transmission and waited. The bridge was silent. Do-hyun stared at his console. My-rae looked at the floor. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then Do-hyun's console lit up. Captain, he said, his voice thick with emotion. All ships are reporting in. Full fleet. Everyone's coming. Jisoo felt something warm spread through her chest. Pride, hope, fear, all mixed together. Then let's not keep them waiting, she said. Set course for Desert Prime. Maximum speed. The stars stretched into lines as the fleet jumped into hyperspace. 3 days of travel. 3 days of preparation. 3 days of not knowing what they would find. On the second day, they received updated reports. The situation was worse than expected. The Keth had brought hundreds of hive ships. The Valrani military was completely destroyed. Cities were burning across the planet. Millions had already died. Jisoo read the reports in her quarters, alone. She did not sleep that night. On the third day, they dropped out of hyperspace above Desert Prime. What they saw stole the breath from their lungs. The planet below was beautiful blue and green and silver, wrapped in gentle clouds. But those clouds were now filled with smoke. Fires burned across entire continents. And hanging in orbit like a swarm of locusts were hundreds of Keth hive ships. Each one was massive, covered in spines and armor plates that looked like the shell of some nightmare insect. Holy Mother of Earth, Do-hyun whispered. Jisoo gripped the arms of her chair. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing. All ships, battle stations, she ordered. Charge weapons. Raise shields. My-rae stepped closer. Captain, there are hundreds of them. We have 5 ships. Jisoo looked at the swarm of enemy vessels. Then she looked down at the burning planet. Somewhere down there, people were dying. People who had called for help. Then, we better make those 5 ships count, she said. Open a channel to the planet. Let them know help has arrived. The message went out. Simple, clear, direct. People of Desert Prime, this is Captain Park Jisoo of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your call. We're here to help. Tell us where to fight. Then she turned to her crew and smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a soldier who knew what was coming. Let's go introduce ourselves. The fleet moved forward into the shadow of the swarm. High Speaker Rivan stood in the command center beneath the capital city of the Sarun. His thin blue skin had turned pale with exhaustion. His large dark eyes, designed for seeing through murky ocean waters, now stared at screens filled with death and destruction. His world was ending. He had accepted this. He had sent the distress signal knowing that help would come too late. The Galactic Concorde was far away. Their medical ships and transports would arrive only to find corpses and ashes. Then the new ships appeared. High Speaker, one of his aides called out, voice trembling. Unknown vessels have entered orbit. 5 ships. They are not Concorde design. Rivan turned to the display. His hearts, all 3 of them, began to beat faster. The ships were angular and aggressive, built for war rather than peace. Nothing like the smooth curves of Concorde vessels. Scan them, he ordered. Tell me what species. The aide worked the controls. When the results appeared, his pale skin turned even paler. High Speaker. The biological readings? They are from a Category 12 world. Arivan felt his legs weaken. Category 12. A death world. A planet so violent and dangerous that any species surviving there was considered a natural predator. The Concord kept careful records of such species. Most were too aggressive for diplomacy. Many were dangerous even to contact. Which species? Arivan asked, though he feared the answer. Humans. From the planet Earth. Arivan had heard stories about humans. All Concord species had. They came from a world of extreme weather, deadly predators, and constant violence. They breathed oxygen mixed with poison. They ate the flesh of other creatures. Their bodies could heal from wounds that would kill any civilized species. And now 5 of their warships hung in orbit above his dying world. They've come to finish what the Keth started, Arivan whispered. We called for saviors and summoned more demons. Before anyone could respond, the communication system activated. A voice came through, translated by the universal systems. It was a female voice, calm and steady. People of Thesser Prime, this is Captain Park Jisoo of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your call. We're here to help. Tell us where to fight. Arivan stared at the speaker. He could not understand. Deathworlders did not help. They conquered. They consumed. That was their nature. It is a trick, one of his advisors said. They want us to lower our defenses. What defenses? Arivan replied bitterly. We have nothing left. He made a decision. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps it was desperate. But his people were dying, and he had nothing left to lose. Open a channel, he ordered. Let me speak to them. The connection crackled to life. Arivan took a deep breath, or what passed for breath, through his gill slits and spoke. Human Captain, this is High Speaker Arivan. Why have you come? What do you want from us? The reply came quickly. We want nothing from you. We heard your distress call. We came to help. Help? Arivan could not keep the disbelief from his voice. You are Deathworlders. Your kind does not help. Your kind takes. There was a pause. Then the human captain spoke again, and there was something strange in her voice. Something that sounded almost like sadness. I understand why you think that, but you called for help, and we answered. That's all that matters right now. We can discuss the rest later if there is a later. Right now, tell me where the Keth are hitting you hardest. Tell me where your people need us most. Arivan looked at his advisors. They were all terrified. But behind the terror, he saw something else. Hope. Desperate, impossible hope. The capital, he said finally. The Soren. The Keth are focusing their ground forces there. We have millions of civilians trapped in the lower districts. Then that's where we're going. Hold on, High Speaker. Help is coming. The channel closed. Arivan watched his screens as the 5 human warships began to move. They were heading straight toward the Keth perimeter. 5 ships, against hundreds. The first human ship opened fire. Arivan had never seen weapons like these. Bright lances of energy cut through space, striking Keth vessels with terrible precision. The Keth returned fire, but the human ships moved with shocking speed, dancing between the attacks like predators hunting prey. One of the aides gasped. They are insane. They are actually attacking. No, Arivan whispered, watching the battle unfold. They are fighting. There's a difference. The Keth were not used to prey that fought back. For centuries, they had swept across the galaxy, consuming species that ran or hid or surrendered. But the humans did none of these things. They charged straight into the swarm, weapons blazing, shields flashing under the impact of enemy fire. One human ship took heavy damage. Its hull was torn and burning. But it did not retreat. It kept fighting, positioning itself between the Keth and the planet below. They are using their own vessel as a shield, an aide said in disbelief. Riven understood something in that moment. These humans were not here to conquer. Conquerors protected their own forces. These creatures were protecting strangers. They were willing to die for people they had never met. On the human ship, Indomitable, Captain Jisoo gripped her chair as the deck shook from another impact. Shields at 40%, Do-yoon reported. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 9. Keep firing, Jisoo ordered. Sergeant Kwon, are your Marines ready? A gruff voice came through the intercom. Sergeant Kwon Taiwan was a large man with a scarred face and steady hands. He had been a soldier for 15 years. Ready and waiting, Captain. Just give us a window. Jisoo studied the tactical display. The Cath were reorganizing, confused by the sudden attack. There was a gap in their formation, a narrow corridor down to the planet's surface. There, she said. Take it. Get to the capital. Find the civilians. Protect them. Understood. Dropships launching in 60 seconds. Ambassador Myray approached the captain. Jisoo, what about the fleet? We can't hold this position forever. We don't need forever, Jisoo replied. We just need long enough. She opened a channel to the planet. I speaker Arivon. We're sending ground forces, Marines. They're going to help defend your capital. Please don't shoot them. Arivon's voice came back, thin with wonder. You are sending soldiers? To die for us? Jisoo thought about the young men and women strapping into dropships. About the fear they must be feeling. About the families waiting for them back on Earth. Yes, she said simply. That's what we do. In the launch bay, Sergeant Kwon stood before his Marines. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes. But they were also determined. Listen up, he said. Down there are people who need our help. They don't know us. They don't understand us. They're probably terrified of us. But none of that matters. What matters is that they're dying, and we can do something about it. He looked at each of them in turn. We are going to drop into hell. Some of us might not come back. But those who survive will be able to look in the mirror and know they did the right thing. That's worth more than all the medals in the galaxy. The dropship doors opened. Below them, the planet burned. For Earth, Kwon said. For humanity. And for everyone who ever needed a helping hand. The dropships fell through the burning sky dot in his command center. Arivon watched them descend. Tears ran down his blue face, something his species rarely did. What are they? He asked no one in particular, but deep in his hearts, he was beginning to understand. These creatures were not demons. They were something far more unexpected. They were hope. Private No Yoonji had never been so scared in her life. She was 22 years old. She had joined the fleet because she wanted to see the stars. She had imagined peaceful exploration, beautiful alien worlds, and maybe some exciting adventures. She had not imagined this. The dropship hit the ground hard, throwing everyone against their restraints. The door blew open, and the smell hit her first smoke and something else, something sharp and chemical. The air of an alien world. Move, move, move! Sergeant Kwon was already running, his rifle raised. The other Marines followed. Yoonji's legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. But she forced herself to move, to follow her squad into the burning streets of the Soran. The city was beautiful, even in destruction. The buildings were made of something like pearl, rising in graceful spirals toward the sky. Bridges connected them at different levels, decorated with plants that glowed softly in the smoke-filled darkness. It was a city built by artists, by dreamers. Now it was dying. Marine civilians ran through the streets. They were small and thin, with blue skin and large dark eyes. They moved in groups, carrying children and elderly members who could not walk fast enough. When they saw the human soldiers, they screamed and tried to run faster. "They're scared of us," Yunji said. "Can you blame them?" Another Marine replied. "We probably look like monsters to them." Sergeant Quan raised his hand, signaling the squad to stop. "Listen up. We need to get to the central shelter. That's where the civilians are gathering. We protect them. We don't chase them. If they run from us, let them go. Eventually, they'll understand we're here to help." They moved through the streets in formation. Dr. Shin Yuna, the fleet's medical officer, was with them. She had insisted on coming down, despite the danger. Her medical bag was heavy on her back. "The Volrani physiology is completely different from ours," she said as they moved. "I've been studying their data. They're fragile. Very fragile. What would be a minor injury for us could kill them. Then, we make sure they don't get injured." Quan said that the first Keth attack came without warning. They burst from a side, street insectoid creatures the size of large dogs, all spines and claws and snapping mandibles. Their exoskeletons were dark red, almost black, and their multiple eyes reflected the firelight like evil gems. "Contact!" Someone shouted. Eung raised her rifle and froze. The creatures were so fast, so alien, so wrong. Her finger would not pull the trigger. A Keth warrior lunged at her. She saw death in its eyes. Then Sergeant Quan was there, his rifle barking fire. The creature fell, twitching, at her feet. "Move, Private," he shouted. "Freeze later." Something clicked in Yunji's mind. The fear did not go away, but she pushed it down, buried it deep. She started shooting. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Keth creatures fell. The battle lasted maybe 2 minutes. It felt like hours. When it was over, 3 Keth lay dead in the street. The Marines were unhurt, but they were breathing hard. "Everyone okay?" Quan asked. "I'm okay," Yunji said, and was surprised to find it was true. She was shaking, but she was okay. They kept moving. More Keth came. More battles. The Marines learned to fight together, covering each other, protecting each other. Yunji stopped freezing. She stopped thinking. She just acted. At one point, they passed a group of Volrani hiding in a destroyed building. The aliens watched the humans with huge, terrified eyes. But they also watched how the humans fought the Keth, how they protected each other, how they kept going despite their wounds. "That one is bleeding," a young Volrani said, pointing at a Marine whose arm had been cut. "It's just a scratch," the Marine replied, wrapping a quick bandage around the wound with one hand while keeping his weapon ready with the other. The Volrani stared. The wound would have killed any of them. But the human just kept fighting. They reached the central shelter as the sun began to set. It was a massive underground structure, designed to protect civilians from natural disasters. Now it held thousands of Volrani, packed together in fear. And outside, the Keth were gathering. "We hold here," Quan ordered. "Set up defensive positions. Dr. Shin, see what you can do for the wounded inside." Yuna nodded and disappeared into the shelter. What she found inside broke her heart. The Volrani medical facilities were overwhelmed. There were too many wounded and not enough supplies. The doctors were exhausted and hopeless. They had been treating injuries for days with no rest. "I can help," Yuna said, approaching the chief medical officer. The Volrani doctor looked at her with exhausted eyes. "You, human? A Deathworlder?" "I'm a doctor. Just like you." She opened her medical bag and started working. The Volrani medicines were different. The anatomy was different, but medicine was medicine. Healing was healing. She adapted, improvised, learned as she worked. Outside, the battle began. Keth warriors swarmed the defensive positions. The Marines fired without stopping, their weapons glowing hot from continuous use. For every Keth that fell, 2 more took its place. Yunji was in the front line. She had stopped being afraid somewhere in the last hour. Now she was just tired. Tired and angry. Angry at the Keth for attacking peaceful people. Angry at the universe for being so cruel. Then she heard it. A small sound, almost lost in the noise of battle. A child crying. She looked around and saw a small Valorant child, maybe the equivalent of 5 or 6 years old. The child was alone, separated from the adults, huddled against a wall as Keth warriors moved closer. "Cover me!" Yoonji shouted and ran. She did not think about the danger. She did not think about protocol. She just ran, sliding to a stop next to the child and scooping them up in her arms. The child screamed at first, terrified of this strange, large creature. But Yoonji held them gently, making soft sounds like her mother used to make when she was scared. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you. I've got you." A Keth warrior appeared in front of her. Yoonji could not use her rifle. Both arms were holding the child. She turned her body, shielding the small Vorani with her own flesh. The Keth's claws raked across her back. Pain exploded through her body, but she did not let go. Sergeant Kwan's bullets took down the Keth a second later. "Move!" he shouted. "Get to the shelter." Yoonji ran, blood flowing down her back. The child clutched tight to her chest. She made it through the entrance and collapsed against the wall. The Volrani doctors rushed toward her. They stopped when they saw what she was holding. "Tyvesh!" someone cried. An adult Volrani pushed through the crowd and took the child from Yoonji's arms. The child was safe. Yoonji smiled through her pain. Dr. Shin was beside her now, working on her wounds. "You idiot," she said, but her voice was fond. "You beautiful idiot." Word spread through the shelter. A human had risked her life for a Valorant child. The Deathworlder had used her own body as a shield. She was bleeding, actually bleeding. That red liquid that Deathworlders carried inside them, and she was still smiling. High Speaker Riven arrived at the shelter an hour later, escorted by his guards. He found the humans still fighting outside, still protecting the entrance. They were wounded, exhausted, and vastly outnumbered, but they were not giving up. He walked into the medical area and found Private Yoonji. She was pale from blood loss, but awake. Beside her sat the child she had saved, holding her hand with tiny blue fingers. "Why?" Orivan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this?" Yoonji looked up at him. She was young, so young, but her eyes held something ancient. "Because someone needed help," she said simply, "and I could give it." Orivan felt tears on his face again. He understood now. These humans were not monsters. They were something far more dangerous. They were heroes. The night fell over Thesser Prime like a heavy blanket. The sky, which should have been filled with beautiful stars, was choked with smoke and the silhouettes of Keth hive ships. In orbit, Captain Jisoo watched her fleet dying. The TSS Indomitable shook as another blast hit the hull. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. Somewhere in the lower decks, metal was tearing. "Shields are gone," Lieutenant Dohin reported, his voice hoarse from hours of battle. "Hull integrity at 31%. Engines at half power." Jisoo gripped her command chair. Her ship was falling apart around her. 2 of her 5 vessels had already been destroyed, their crews scattered like stars in the darkness. The survivors fought on, but they were running out of time. "How long until the second fleet arrives?" she asked. Do-hyun checked his console. His face was gray with exhaustion, but his hands were steady. 12 hours. Maybe 11 if they push their engines. 12 hours. It might as well have been 12 years. "Captain," Ambassador Myray said quietly, "we could withdraw. Pull back to a safer position. Wait for reinforcements." Jisoo looked at the planet below. Somewhere down there, her Marines were fighting. Civilians were hiding. The whole species was praying for survival. If we withdraw, the Keth will have clear access to the planet, she said. They'll send landing parties. The ground forces won't last an hour. If we stay, we die. Jisoo smiled, though there was no joy in it. Then we die. But we die between them and the people we came to save. She opened a channel to the remaining ships. All vessels, this is Captain Park. I want a new formation. Diamond pattern centered on my position. We're gonna make ourselves the biggest target the Keth have ever seen. Captain? Dohan's voice was uncertain. If they're shooting at us, they're not shooting at the planet. We hold their attention. We keep them focused on us. Every minute we survive is another minute for the people below. The remaining ships moved into position. The Indomitable, battered and burning, took the front. The Keth attacked. On the ground, Sergeant Quan felt the impact of explosions in the distance. More Keth were coming. Always more. He was wounded. A Keth claw had opened his side during the last assault, and Dr. Shin had patched him up with quick stitches and painkillers. The pain was a distant throb, like a drumbeat in his chest. Sergeant, one of his Marines, called. We're running low on ammunition. Quan nodded. He had expected this. They had been fighting for hours. Even the best supplies could not last forever. Use your shots wisely, he ordered. Make each one count. The Valrani had started helping. After watching the humans fight and bleed for them, something had changed. They were still afraid, but they were no longer helpless. The stronger ones helped move wounded Marines. Others brought water and whatever food they could find. Some even picked up fallen Keth weapons and tried to figure out how to use them. High Speaker Arivon stood beside Quan, watching his people transform. I have never seen my people like this, he said. We are not a warrior species. We have never needed to be. Everyone becomes a warrior when their home is threatened, Quan replied. Even the gentlest creature will fight to protect their family. Is that why you fight? For your families? Quan thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 7 years old, with her mother's smile and his stubborn attitude. He had promised to bring her a present from the stars. Partly, he said, but also because someone needs to. If not us, then who? Orivan had no answer for that dot in the medical area. Dr. Shin was performing miracles. She had learned more about Velrani anatomy in one night than most xenobiologists learned in a lifetime. She adapted human techniques to alien bodies. She improvised tools from whatever she could find. She saved lives. Doctor, a Velrani nurse said, approaching with something like awe. You have been working for 9 hours. Do you not need rest? Shin looked up. Her eyes were red with exhaustion, her hands stained with blue Velrani blood. But she shook her head. There are still patients. I'll rest when they're stable. But your body, you are injured too. The nurse pointed at a cut on Shin's arm, still bleeding slightly. Shin glanced at it as if noticing it for the first time. This is nothing. A scratch. The nurse stared. Among the Velrani, such a wound would require immediate attention. But the human doctor just wrapped a quick bandage around it with one hand while continuing to treat a patient with the other. You are very strange creatures, the nurse said softly. We get that a lot. Shin replied with a tired smile. Outside, the Keth launched their biggest assault yet. They came from all directions, swarming over the barriers like a living tide. The Marines fired until their weapons were empty, then fought with knives and fists. The Velrani who had taken up arms fought beside them. Clumsy but determined Private Yunji was back in the fight. Despite her wounds, Dr. Shin had wanted to keep her in the medical area. But Yunji had refused. My friends are out there, she had said. I'm not hiding while they die. Now she fought at the front line, her back burning with pain, her rifle steady in her hands. Beside her, little Taivsh's parent fought too, wielding a Keth blade with unpracticed but fierce determination. "Stay behind me," Yunji shouted to them. "I'll cover you." The Velrani looked at her, this strange bloody creature who had saved their child, and nodded. The battle was chaos. Noise and fire and screaming. Yunji lost track of time. She stopped thinking about anything except the next enemy, the next shot, the next moment of survival. Then the ground shook. Everyone human, Velrani, and Keth alike stopped and looked up. Something was happening in orbit. Lights were flashing, brighter than any weapon's fire. The sky itself seemed to ripple. "What is that?" someone asked. Lieutenant Dojin's voice came through the communication systems, breaking and crackling with static but unmistakably joyful. "Ground forces, this is Lieutenant Dojin. Be advised the Second Fleet has arrived. I repeat, reinforcements have arrived." Yunji felt her legs weaken. Tears burned in her eyes. In orbit, Captain Jisoo watched the most beautiful sight of her life. Dozens of ships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. The Terran Second Fleet, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled outside the Sol system. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, a wall of metal and firepower that made the Keth swarm look small. "Captain Park," a new voice came through the communications. "This is Admiral Choi of the TSS Resolute. Sorry, we're late. The engines held together better than expected." Jisoo laughed. Actually laughed, despite the burning ship around her. "Admiral, you have the best timing I've ever seen. Save the compliments for later. Right now, let's teach these bugs a lesson about picking on our friends." The Second Fleet opened fire. The Keth had never faced anything like this. For centuries, they had been the hunters. They had consumed species without resistance, swept across worlds like fire through dry grass. They did not know how to deal with prey that outnumbered them. Prey that was just as aggressive, just as deadly. The hive ships tried to retreat, but the human fleet was faster. Ship after ship was destroyed, torn apart by weapons that hit like the fists of angry gods. On the ground, the Keth forces faltered. The connection to their hive mothers in orbit was breaking. They were losing coordination, losing purpose. The Marines pushed forward. "Now," Sergeant Quan shouted. "Push them back. Every step we take is one more step toward victory." The humans charged. The Velrani charged with them. And the Keth, for the first time in their species' history, broke and ran. In her command center, the Keth Broodmother, known as Designation K7, felt something she had never felt before. Her swarm was dying. Her hive ships were burning. The prey she had come to consume was consuming her instead. She felt fear. The humans were everything her species was not. They were emotional, irrational, willing to die for creatures that were not even their own kind. It made no sense. It violated every law of survival. And yet, they were winning. K7 made a decision. She ordered retreat. Full retreat. Leave this cursed world and its Deathworlder defenders. Warn the other broods. Stay away from these creatures. The Keth fled into the darkness between stars, and behind them, Lesser Prime began to heal in the ruins of the capital. Yunji sat down heavily. Her wounds were bleeding again. Her whole body felt like one giant bruise. But she was smiling. They had done it. They had survived the long night. Tavesh ran to her and hugged her leg, careful to avoid her injuries. The child said something in Velrani that Yunji did not understand, but she understood the feeling behind it. "Thank you," she whispered back, pulling the child close. "Thank you for being brave." Above them, the sun began to rise on a new day. 1 week had passed since the battle for Lesser Prime. The fires were finally out. The smoke had cleared. The sky was blue again, decorated with clouds that carried rain instead of ash. Across the planet, The work of recovery had begun. Human ships filled the orbit now. Not warships, but transports and medical vessels. Engineers came to help rebuild. Doctors came to heal the wounded. Supplies flowed down like water from a great river. Captain Park Jizu stood on a balcony in the capital city, watching the reconstruction. Her arm was in a sling. A piece of her own ship had nearly killed her during the final battle, but she was alive. Most of her crew was alive. That was more than she had dared to hope. "Captain," Ambassador Yu Mairi said, approaching with a tablet in her hands. "The Galactic Concord delegation has arrived. They want to meet with you." Jisoo nodded. She had expected this. The Concord had been watching the battle from a safe distance, their peaceful response fleets arriving only after the fighting was done. Now they wanted to understand what had happened, what the humans had done, what it meant for the galaxy. The meeting took place in a great hall that had survived the attack mostly intact. The walls were made of that beautiful pearl-like material the Valrani loved. Representatives from a dozen species sat in a circle, their translators working overtime to make everyone understood. High Speaker Arevan stood at the center. He was still thin and tired, but there was something new in his posture. Strength. Purpose. "Fellow members of the Galactic Concord," he began, his voice carrying through the hall. "1 week ago, my people faced extinction. We sent a message to the stars, begging for help. We expected your medical ships. We expected your evacuation transports." He paused, looking around the room. Instead, something else answered our call. A species from a world so dangerous that our databases labeled them natural predators, Deathworlders, monsters. Some of you might say. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably. These humans arrived with only 5 ships. They faced hundreds of Keth vessels. They had no treaty with us, no obligation, no reason to risk their lives. And yet they came. Riven's voice grew stronger. "I watched them fight. I watched them bleed. I watched them die for my people. Strangers who had never met us, sacrificing everything for people they would never see again. One of their soldiers used her own body as a shield to protect the child. Their doctors worked until they collapsed, healing our wounded. Their captain used her damaged ship to draw enemy fire away from our evacuation transports." He looked directly at the Concord representatives. "You call them monsters. I call them heroes. You fear their strength. I am grateful for it. Because when my world was burning, they were the only ones who came to help." Silence fell over the hall. Some representatives looked ashamed. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked angry. Finally, one of them spoke, a tall insectoid being from a species called Detherian. "High Speaker, we understand your gratitude. But the humans are dangerous. Their nature is violent. How do we know they will not turn that violence against us?" O'Revan smiled. It was a sad smile, but also knowing. I asked their captain the same question. "Do you know what she told me?" She said that humans have always had to choose. They come from a world of violence, yes, but they also come from a world of love. They can be the greatest destroyers the galaxy has ever seen, or they can be the greatest protectors. The choice is theirs. He gestured toward the humans in the room, Captain Jisoo, Ambassador Mireille, and several others. They chose to protect us. Perhaps we should learn from that. The debate continued for hours. In the end, the Concord agreed to open formal relations with humanity. It was not an alliance, not yet, but it was a beginning. After the meeting, Jisoo walked through the streets of the Soren. The Valani watched her pass. Some still looked afraid, but many more bowed their heads in respect. Children pointed and whispered. One elderly Valrain reached out to touch her hand, tears in their large, dark eyes. "Thank you," they said. Just that, nothing more. Jisoo nodded and walked on. She found Sergeant Quan in the human medical camp. He was sitting up in his bed, bandages covering most of his torso. His recovery would take weeks, but he would live. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got run over by a transport ship," he replied with a weak grin. "But the doctors say I'll be back to normal eventually." "Good. I need my best sergeant." They talked for a while about the battle, about the soldiers they had lost, about the ones who had survived. It was the kind of conversation that soldiers had after every war, part grief, part pride, part simple need to process what they had experienced in another part of the camp. Private Yunji was saying goodbye to Taivesh. The child had been returned to their family, an aunt and uncle who had lost everyone else in the attack. They had adopted Taivesh and were preparing to return to their home in the countryside, far from the destroyed capital. "I'll miss you," Yunji said, kneeling to look into the child's large eyes. Taivesh did not fully understand her words, but understood the feeling. They reached into a small bag and pulled out something, a stone, polished smooth and painted with symbols. "For you," Taivesh said in broken human words they had learned over the past week. "Remember." Yunji took the stone. It was warm in her hand. She felt tears threatening to fall. "I'll remember," she promised. "Always." The aunt and uncle approached. They bowed deeply to Yunji, a gesture of highest respect among the Volreni. "You saved our child," the aunt said through a translator. "We can never repay this debt." "There is no debt," Yunji replied. "Just take care of them. That's all I ask." She watched them leave, the small blue figure of Taivesh looking back and waving until they disappeared from sight. Doctor Shin found her there an hour later, still holding the stone. "You okay?" Shin asked. "Yeah," Yunji said. "Just thinking." "About what?" Yunji looked up at the sky, now clear and beautiful. "About why we do this. Why we fight. Why we're willing to die for people we've never met." She turned the stone over in her hand. "I didn't have an answer before, but I think I do now. And what is it? Because if we don't, who will? The universe is big and dark, and sometimes really scary. But if people like us don't stand up, don't try to help, then the darkness wins." She smiled. "And I really don't want the darkness to win." Shin put a hand on her shoulder. "You're going to make a hell of a soldier, kid." "I already am," Yunji replied with a grin. 2 days later, the human fleet prepared to depart. There was still work to do on Lesser Prime, but other ships would handle that. Jisoo and her crew were needed elsewhere. Before they left, High Speaker Riven came to the Indomitable newly repaired and ready for service to say goodbye. "Captain Park," he said, standing on the observation deck beside her, "I want you to know that my people will never forget what you did. Generations from now, our children will tell stories of the humans who came from the stars to save us." Jisoo looked out at the planet below, healing and green and beautiful. "We didn't do anything special," she said. "We just answered a call for help." Oriven shook his head. "You did something extraordinary. You showed us that the universe is not as cruel as we feared, that there is compassion among the stars. That is no small gift." They stood in silence for a moment. "Will you come back?" Oriven asked. "If you need us," Jisoo replied. "If you ever call, we'll answer." "That's a promise." He nodded, satisfied. "Then I will say goodbye, but not farewell. I believe we will meet again, Captain, under better circumstances." He left, and Jisoo watched him go. Then a message came through from Lieutenant Doyun. "Captain, we're receiving a new distress signal. Another species, another system. Looks like they're under attack by pirates." Jisoo smiled. It was not a tired smile anymore. It was the smile of someone who had found their purpose. "Set course," she ordered. "Maximum speed." Aye, Captain. Should I prepare a message for them? Jizoo thought about it. Tell them help is on the way. Tell them they're not alone. The Indomitable jumped to hyperspace, chasing the stars toward another world in need. And somewhere in the darkness, a Keth Broodmother spread a warning through the swarm. Stay away from the Deathworlders called humans. They are not prey. They are not predators. They are protectors, and the galaxy would never be the same